siyang mahirap lang.
Ito yung pinakatahong at pinakakamot na bulak sa bilog na ito.
Paano ko na po yung resulta?
Ano? May tanggap ka.
Ang tawag to ay intindi kung ano tawag ng waiver.
Hindi ako takot mo. Mahusgahan lang ng tao.
Wala sa baho sa Panginoon sa mga
Sa kadako sa kalibutan, makatultog yapon sila silang salag.
I will show you something if you send the money.
Nak, narinig mo ako? Wait lang, ma. Para kaming basura dito, may tinapon lang.
Sapagkat ang araw na to ay inilaan na para sa iyo at habang buhay ay laging sumasayo.
Wala, bota na si Mrs. ngayon eh. Bukas ka na lang.
Handa ka na ba sa ating showdown? Girl, I was born ready.
Di man to bata nga lagawan.
Happy magka ka. Happy ka.
Walang kalimutan.
Ano kaya nangyari sa mga tao, no? Saan kaya sila nagpunta?
Galit na galit at malaking dragon na may diwata na pinangko.
Bon, ayaw nagtubuhat na balik, okay?
Mabdos ko.
Sa? Pag-sure, oy! Asa mo na nabi?
Magpapatuli ako. Pwede mo ba akong samahan?
Binenta naman kasi. Hindi na. Aabot din tayong lahat kahit iba-iba tayo ng uri.
Kuya, laro.
Sabi nga ayoko!
Kinakausap mo na naman ba yung mga laruan mo?
You should really catch up.
It's always been our goal to understand not just the needs of the industry in terms of development, in terms of programs, but to really address the structural changes that needs to be instituted. We need government's intervention. We need to work together, private sector and government. We have to work together so that we can elevate our industry. And these policies are needed for us to thrive. And that's the reason why FDCP has been working with Korea, has been working with Singapore, has been working with Malaysia. We're understanding their best practices and understanding how we can adapt it to our local industry.
Our lab is an Asian lab, and the way it's a little bit different from, say other labs outside is that we are not just labs that concentrate on films that has to go to these big A-list festivals. We also want projects that can actually work within the Asian region. And so they're not like always the art house kind of films, but they're also kind kind of like, whether it be comedy or horror, that can work in a wider context of Asia is something that we are also very active about.
And not thinking that you're making a film for the international market. Make the film for what you believe in. Actually, those surprises are films that were not made to win Oscars. Do your films and then we'll go where it should go.
Of sharing, I think, can help you grow, get more confidence, and besides make connections. For me, this kind of collaborative process is very interesting, and I think that's something, as you said, the two of you earlier, which has a kind of a very interesting impact, indeed also, because I think indirectly it does help the local regional film industry to be stronger also.
As a society, we realize with this pandemic that we cannot live in isolation. And the film industries and the TV industries cannot also be in isolation. We really need to sort of like find alliances with all the different industries that are affected and how we all come together to sort of like push our agendas forward. And the key agenda is how to have life resume again the way we had pre-pandemic.
For more details on IFIC, please check our official social media accounts. Facebook page, www.facebook.com/IFICPHofficial. Twitter, @IFICPHofficial. And Instagram, IFICPHofficial. To register for IFIC public sessions and masterclasses, visit our website at fdcp.ph/IFIC. Check out the full lineup of public sessions and masterclasses for this year's Film Industry Conference. Visit our website at fdcp.ph/IFIC. International Film Industry Conference Online 2021 is presented by Film Development Council of the Philippines in partnership with Full Circle Lab Philippines, Asean Rock Film Partnership, supported by International Film Commission Partners, Film Philippines Office, Korean Film Council, National Film Development Corporation Malaysia, Singapore Film Commission, and the National Federation of Motion Pictures and Contents Associations, Thailand. International partners, Cannes Next of Marché du Film Festival de Cannes, Hubert Balls of International Film Festival Rotterdam, Netflix, Purin Pictures, IFIC Lab, Southeast Asia Pacific Audiovisual Archives Association, Torino Film Lab. Local partners, ABS-CBN Film Restoration Sagip Pelikula, KTX, Philippine Film Archive, TBA Play and TBA Studios, Upstream PH, Viva Communications Inc. Livestream partner, Digital IC3 Productions. Thank you for joining us today. Sit back and relax as we are about to begin. The International Film Industry Conference, or IFIC, first conducted by the Film Development Council of the Philippines, or FDCP, in 2017, aims to bring together international and local experts to share and discuss the latest trends, opportunities, platforms, and cooperation globally that producers and filmmakers can explore for the development, production, and distribution of their projects, with the intent of crossing beyond local borders. The IFIC strives to continue the synergy of the members of the industry by featuring experts and professionals this September 2021. This event will give a platform to further explore opportunities, challenges, and new norms in the film industry as we push and thrive to move forward in a global pandemic. Our next session will focus on the expected trends and waves in the world's film industry as it recovers from the pandemic, especially in film markets such as Marché du Film of Festival de Cannes. Our speaker is a Europe and Asia-based film and media innovation strategist, awarded film producer and programmer, public speaker and moderator, and content and technology entrepreneur. He heads the innovation track next at the Marché du Film of the Festival de Cannes and advises several governments on media, innovation, and technology. He frequently consults local and international organizations on creativity, film, innovation, technology, and Asia, including the Estonian Ministry of Culture, Startup Estonia, as well as the European Commission. He recently co-authored the report for the Industrial Media and Technology Strategy for Europe by Special Advisor Klosa to the Vice President, Digital Single Market, Andres Ansip, and developed and wrote the 2.0 strategy for Startup Estonia, the flagship umbrella organization for Estonian startups and innovation-driven ventures, and is strategic advisor for Accelerate Estonia, the public sector moonshot lab solving global wicked problems through Estonia's digital DNA. Since 2020, he serves as advisory board member for the future hubs of the Flemish public broadcaster VRT, along with BBC, RTBF, EBU, MCB, and the Red Bull Media House. Be updated with the latest film market strategies and trends with Sten-Kristian Saluveer.
So good evening. Thank you so much for this lovely introduction, and I'm very glad and honored to join the International Film Industry Conference of the Philippines from here, from Tallinn, Estonia. As it was said, my name is Sten Saluveer, and I do a variety of things. Amongst them, I am the strategic advisor for the Marché du Film and the curator of the next Sidebar at the Cannes film market, where we are focusing on the bigger shifts and opportunities, mostly for the independent film industry. In the next hour or so, I would like to focus on some of those big shifts that have been escalated, of course, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it can be actually paradoxically said that some of those larger structural changes that influence our everyday lives as financiers, as producers, as distributors, as performers, or post-production specialists, that those kinds of things were already happening for quite a while. But what COVID really did was it just within 1 year made all of those changes happen that had been slowly starting almost a decade ago. And I'd like to tell you a little bit what is going on in the international market and what are those larger, bigger shifts, such as the challenges at Theatrical, the move to digital platforms and what those offer. I'd like to also touch on some of those core technologies which are already revolutionizing how films are being made and now are finally accessible for independent producers as well worldwide. I'd like to a little bit talk about what types of skills I guess you would need for the future to be a successful filmmaker. And last but not least, I'd love to a little bit touch on also how film markets are changing and what we specifically see at Cannes and why you should have a market strategy to be successful both locally and internationally. We have about 50 minutes to go through about 70 slides, so I have to go quite fast, and we'll have a Q&A sessions and be very happy to discuss with you in the future. So next, please. All right. So my talk will be about understanding the next big thing, from exponential change to markets and beyond. And as I said before, we're looking at some of those bigger changes in the market, in the overall global landscape, and we also focus what happens on the markets. Next, please. So who am I? I originally actually studied as a classical guitarist and a film and a television producer. But quite early on, I got involved with a film festival, the Black Nights Film Festival in Tallinn, which started almost 25 years ago as a very, very small community event. In 1997, we had 30 films and I guess around 30 guests. And now, of course, the Black Nights Film Festival is an A-class film festival with more than 700 films and almost 2,000 guests. And we've been always very welcoming to the Philippine filmmakers as well. So I worked at the Black Nights Film Festival in various capacities, both in production and programming of Asian films. And that actually set me on a course to dedicate much of my life working with Asian cinema. I moved to Tokyo more than 10 years ago, where I was specifically researching Asian co-productions with Europe, and do that course. I managed to produce a few co-productions between Europe and Asia, specifically two with Korea and one with Laos, which I will talk a little bit later. I've been always very much fascinated about also how technology influences filmmaking, and for about 5 years, my own company called Storytech has been supporting and investing into projects around IP, and actually specifically technologies that are changing the film and media industry. We've raised about 10 million euros for a variety of those companies, and we're glad to see that 23 of our initial portfolio investments, out of those 23, about 10 are doing really well. And most recently, I also, through our newest program called Stadium, we're basically investing into pilot projects with technology companies, with film producers and media organizations, including using artificial intelligence, curation algorithms, new forms of payment, and etc., to make the film industry more competitive. Next, please. So I've also been quite involved in film festivals and markets. As I said before, my main mission right now is to work with the Marché de Film at the Cannes Film Festival to help to steer this organization and curate the innovation and industry change programs. I also work as an advisor for the Geneva Film Festival and the digital market, the Tallinn Black Nights Film Festival, as well as being a project assessor for the Udine Far East Film Festival, which every year receives quite a good number of great Filipino projects. As said before, together with my colleagues from BBC and some of the bigger European broadcasters, I am also a member of the advisory board for the Future Media Hubs at VRT, which is one of the biggest European broadcasters, as well as a good co-producer for film. And I've been very glad to lecture and work with some of the exciting talents at the Taipei Film Academy, the Next Wave program at Berlin, Baltic Film and Media School, and the Tel Aviv co-production market. Next, please. So here are some of the films what I've produced before. As I said, a few of them have been Asian co-productions. Most recently, our co-production with Laos, a film called Dearest Sister by Matty Doe was quite a groundbreaking adventure. It was the first film made in Laos over a decade. It was the first feature film directed by a female filmmaker from Laos. And we were quite happy that this very small and independent film went to play in more than 40 festivals, including the BFI, Sitges, Fantastic Fest, and some of the others, and has been sold to 10 territories as well. And most recently, we're working on a new documentary that basically explores the agency and the problems around young athletes in extreme sports. Next, please. As I said before, I am also an investor and a financier. If you have projects that require investments, please do get in touch. My contacts are at the end of the presentation, or please ask them from FDCP. Specifically, we invest into projects that either have potential to scale into other forms of media, whether those are animation, online, or so forth, but we're also looking into interesting feature projects as well. Our next investment round with the Stadium fund is coming up in next January, and currently we've already invested almost €1 million into 16 ongoing pilots. Next, please. I also work as a strategist, but I guess that's not our main topic, and please go next. As well as a market digitalization consultant. And of course, one of the key themes to talk about the digitalization of the markets is that it definitely last year was an extraordinary year for Philippines and the rest of the world as well. And we definitely saw a lot of change in the festival and market landscape where a lot of events needed to go hybrid or fully digital very fast. And last year, I worked with 4 festivals on helping them to digitalize the CPH talks in Copenhagen, the Marché de Film, the B3 Biennale in Frankfurt, and the Tallinn Black Nights. And it gave me quite a good understanding of what are those challenges that are facing filmmakers and creatives in this new hybrid landscape. Next, please. Next, please. And next. All right, we're getting into the heart of the matter. So what are some of those bigger trends that are influencing filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers all over the world? Some of those might be very familiar to you, but let me reiterate those as well. So first of all, what we're really seeing is that unprecedentedly with COVID, we are seeing a huge competition of eyeballs. What I basically mean by this is that especially during the COVID time, and I will show you a few statistics later, what we've really seen is a tremendous rise of digital content coming out everywhere. I think being on Zoom almost constantly from morning to evening might be very familiar to you as well, especially in the context of markets. But what we definitely see is that there is a drastic explosion of all kinds of content around us. So one of the key issues there is the fact that when you're bringing out your independent film or you're going to produce a film, your critical question is, I guess, not so much anymore financing or distribution, but how do you actually access the audience? Because whilst we have this huge content explosion, one of the constants that remains the same is time. We don't have more time than 24 hours in 24 hours in one day and night. And we have to also see that due to the fact that we have so much media and so much content around, especially digital content, the competition there is of grabbing the audience attention and basically trying to find a way how they could allocate time to watch your film. So of course your film has to be excellent, it has to stand out, but the critical factor there is like, how do you get your audience's attention and how do you fit into that day that has, people's everyday chores, Zoom calls, some Netflix or other platform viewing, maybe a younger audience is playing games, and then people need to live their private lives as well. And we are getting into a situation where people, especially if they don't have strong incentives, are not actually turning up for films what they would usually see. What I saw personally last year by working with 4 of those big festivals, and I'm going to come back to that subject a little bit later, was the fact that the behavior of audiences, especially with digital festivals and digital platforms for festivals, was completely different. What they would do in real life. If in real life, an average person on a festival would see, 8 or 10 films or 12 films or 15 films, then, in online spaces, people are, and especially in this COVID environment, their behavior is completely different. And, perhaps they are watching, 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 films maximum, because their lives are already filled with other types of digital content and etc. So in reality, people are tired being in front of the screens. And the question then is that if our life is predominantly digital, especially in these lockdown or semi-lockdown situations, then how do you actually reach those audiences? What type of personal connection, a sense of community, experience, or shock, or anything else? How can you actually grab that audience to give their eyeballs to your film? The second thing, what I also have to say, and this is quite sad news, is that we are experiencing a slow death of the theatrical window. There are some differences in the world. Of course, some markets are doing better than others, but it's definitely clear that the theatrical distribution and the whole theatrical value chain has packed itself last year. You might have heard or experienced that all major Hollywood studios have pivoted to online distribution. And please keep in mind that those big players can afford themselves such a big pivot or change in their distribution strategy perhaps once in a decade. And strangely enough, when the first news of the HBO releases for Dune and other films popped out last year, I said, I made a prognosis that many other studios will follow, and indeed they have. And if big studios already are pivoting in there, it's definitely clear that the whole industry will follow. So certainly the predominant model will be hybrid, with the majority of distribution in the future going into all kinds of platforms, major platforms, independent platforms, regional platforms, and so forth. And theatrical is going to be very experiential, primarily for festivals, special experiences, and big blockbuster films. But certainly, because COVID will stay with us for quite a foreseeable future, and the business models itself in theatrical are challenged, certainly theatrical will not be your main recoupment or an exhibition target. We definitely also see, thanks to this type of a fragmentation, that there will be a distinction between a very loyal and interested niche art house for smaller films who go for either loyalty or interest in the director, cast, or any of the like. And it will be a loyal audience. It will follow the certain smaller films, filmmakers, and topics. And then we would definitely have a distinction between blockbuster content or digital content produced for huge mass. And there will be only a few exceptions that are able to breach that cap. And obviously that trend has been visible for quite a while. It's also clear that we will have less public financing everywhere because the public financiers are overloaded with other obligations. However, new types of investments are popping up. Festivals are primarily becoming your key distributors, in a sense that since the classical distribution windows are closing down, you might actually have to start considering, or I would recommend considering charging screening fees, at least minimum screening fees, because those might be the first money that your independent film will see. I also would claim that the business is quite diminishing in the sales agent-driven model. Especially, again, because of the fact that the theatrical windows are closing and much of the sales agent community has not yet been able to pivot into this new digital reality where understanding the audience, making your decisions based on data, having a very kind of fast, rapid, and nuclear approach to the marketing of your film and so forth. So we definitely see that some of the better sales agents and who either have a very clear slate, a good reputation, or so forth, will stay, but we'll definitely see that the sales agent market will be shrinking tremendously, what we also saw at this year's Cannes. It will be digital first, and everything else comes later. And I also have to say that probably we saw the last year of the film markets and film festivals as they used to be, and we are heading into some type of a future which is quite daunting and quite unknown. And of course, the big question is, what does cinema mean for Generation Z and younger audiences whose life is mostly about digital platforms, playing online games, and so forth? And where we already see these very fascinating hybrids of Christopher Nolan, premiering his new film trailers at Fortnite and so forth. Then the places where those people hang out are not anymore cinemas, but rather online communities and so forth. So how we as filmmakers, understanding that stories are the kind of soul of humankind, how can we take advantage of this shift and access those audiences where they are and not trying to force them into locations where we want them to be? So those are one of those key trends what we see at the market. Next, please. Of course, and I can't stress this enough, the future will be about platforms, platforms, and platforms. And what COVID really has shown us primarily is that digital platforms that connect content producers and or content creators and content owners have seen a tremendous rise across the whole spectrum, really from VOD to live streaming to online communities and so forth. And the potential that platforms offer, a possibility if the matches are working, that you can access large audiences. This is really going to be the model how the future distribution and the future access to audiences will look like. And of course, we can't really ignore the long-term impact of COVID. We have been in the situation for about 2 years, but most likely the structural changes what have happened will be visible in the next 3 to 5 year horizon. So we can still expect quite a lot of market disruption and generally a disruptive situation in general and around our industry as well. Next, please. So this basically calls for quite a tough reality check if you are an independent filmmaker. If you want to get your stories seen and your stories told and the stories watched, how do you actually adjust yourself into this new reality? And this is a question what myself as a partner in an independent production company or Rare Films, I'm asking myself on a daily basis. What should I do? What should I learn? How should I pivot in order to keep making the films and accessing the audiences? Next, please. So the key question really is when you start kind of building your strategy, why, if you project yourself to an audience's perspective, why somebody should watch your film if they already have so many, services, what they subscribe to. A recent study, for example, in UK showed that, average household has something like 13 subscriptions. And the average bill for an household in UK right now is about £75 per household for various subscriptions. So if they already have Netflix, Hulu, HiFlix, and other platforms, then how do you kind of incentivize your audiences, and how do you structure your story? How do you make your production to stand out if they already are committed to those platforms and your film is necessarily playing on those platforms? So really, that type of perspective, I think, sheds quite a new light into how our film industry operates. Historically, we have been very, very selfish, including myself, because the film industry primarily has thought about itself. It has thought about screenwriters, producers, performers, and so forth. And the kind of the whole nucleus in the classical film distribution system has been very much of the process or the industry-centric, and less than the audience-centric. So what last year demonstrated was that, for example, in case of online festivals, and I'm not sure if you have come across this number, is that the average conversion ratio, of course there are exceptions, for an online festival was about 10%. So what does this conversion ratio mean? It basically means that if an online festival takes place, and let's say there is 1,000 people going to the website of the festival to look at what type of lineup it is, then only 10% by average, that's 100 people, will actually go and buy a ticket. In some other cases, that number is even more smaller. It's about 6% and so forth. So the critical point there, as I said before, is grabbing the audience's attention and making sure that, when you are a filmmaker, what you can do in collaboration with a particular festival or screening platform to direct the audience there. Even further, it's been also very, very clear that from various studies and also first-hand experience that one of the primary sources how audiences make decisions about films is the trailer. And imagine a situation if your film is on page 2 in an online festival, and your film even doesn't have materials, or for example doesn't have an international trailer. What are your chances for your fresh film to be discovered if it doesn't have a famous cast or otherwise attention grabbing data kind of attached to it? So again, that the fact that there are so much offering out there, forces the filmmakers to really figure out how they can, in part, not just handle their film over to a festival and then expect results, but really take a very active, even a proactive role in actually establishing contacts with your audiences, making sure that your materials there, that the trailer of your film, the synopsis of your film is available online in YouTube or Facebook or any other platforms, that you basically go the last mile, helping the distribution and the exhibition community to do the best job. Because quite often, especially for festivals, they are at the end of the value chain in this new hybrid situation, and much of the responsibility of raising the audiences, cultivating the audiences, and then getting the maximum of audiences to the films has been currently put on the festival, and that's festivals, and obviously that's too much. And because the job of the festivals is not to be VOD providers or audience cultivators, at least historically, and any activities on your behalf that can actually alleviate or go to a festival, identifying the audiences, having the materials ready, and so forth, will help you to maximize your success in this digital world. Next, please. So what we definitely also see is that filmmakers and especially producers are forced to start building new types of skill sets. Historically, of course, all the functions in the film industry, especially in the leadership positions, have been very much differentiated. We have people focused on marketing, we have people focused on sales, curation, distribution, and so forth. And the COVID situation, where the kind of the classical structure, from a production company to a sales agent to a distributor and to an exhibitor, it has really kind of unfolded where new structures and new models, basically from producer to a sales agent or from producer directly to a platform, are merging. So that's why you as a producer need to really cultivate new types of skills. You have to understand how to work with people, especially in remote work situations, because a lot of people in the film industry are not accustomed to that. You have to understand at least a preliminary understanding of the video and online platforms, how they work, how to ensure the security of film. Very importantly, you have to understand also the basics analytics, who watched your films, where the audiences are, how can you make small experiments to try out who's your audience online for your film versus who's the regular audience of your film in real life. You have to, of course, understand a little bit about broadcast and streaming, and then obviously audience psychology and behavior. And really all of that is necessary, as I said before, to make better connections with the audiences and try to understand how you can cut through the noise. I will give you just one example. The regular audience for independent and festival films, at least in Europe, is a female between 30 to 35. And many festivals, of course, when they make their offerings available in the hybrid space, they also last year proceeded from that type of a presumption. Now, having said that, last year when I worked with several festivals, what we actually discovered that, can you believe it or not, the average audience for an art house film, especially documentary, in online hybrid festivals is a young male in the 20s. And of course, it's a totally different type of demographic and psychographic. So why is so? Quite often, the online festivals participation in online festivals requires quite a bit of technical skill. You have to know how to kind of surf the internet. You have to either have a PayPal account or a credit card account to basically access the film. And that's quite a lot of things what an audience needs to do in order to actually get to see the film. And obviously, young computer savvy or digital savvy males are orienting themselves better in that world, which means that the classical, art house type of audiences, whether they are like female or older audiences, 60 plus, are almost excluded from this distribution structure. So again, this is a challenge for the producers and the content creators to understand how can we help our audiences to access our content better and actually get to see the film and have and maintain the interest to see our films. Next, please. So what I basically say is, what I'm basically implying is that the success of your film primarily depends now on very, very close collaboration with your core partner. So you have to work quite closely with the festival, where you're positioning your film to understand who the festival audiences are, how to access them, how to get them the right information. You have to understand a little bit what are the core digital channels, in a certain type of a territory. And you also a little bit need to have an understanding of the behavioral, technical, and audience knowledge in order to make the audience move in this new digital space. And exactly that collaboration through those lines between an independent producer, a digital channel, and the festival will result in audience success. Next, please. So if you don't kind of believe my insights into this area, there are a few people who have done some amazing research, especially in the transformation of those markets. One of the persons I highly recommend you to get familiar with is Ezra Eman. Ezra Eman. Ezra was the chief strategist of the European Broadcasting Union, that is basically a trade association of the biggest European broadcasters, including Arte, BBC, Channel 4, and so forth. And last summer, Ezra wrote an amazing 4-part article series called The Content Crash, which is available on Medium, and I highly recommend you to read it. But according to the research carried out by Ezra and his colleagues, yes, platforms and digital distribution are taking over. So in the next 5 years, it has been projected that in Europe alone, the theatrical sector, thanks to COVID and digital escalation, will face almost minus 23 billion euros of damages. Basically, the theatrical exhibition sector is shrinking very, very fast because of limited access to real estate, fears around customers to enter cinemas and so forth. And of course, that money doesn't evaporate somewhere, but guess where it goes to? Of course, digital platforms and the new digital distribution methodologies. So digital is coming very strongly, and it will be predominantly the main venue where films will be seen, both in regular distribution and exhibition, as well as festivals. Next, please. Also, the same trend basically doesn't only is not only visible for feature film content, but also series content as well. And if you'd like to get the slides, then those can be shared later, and you can see on the statistics that the biggest growth for platforms actually takes place in Southeast Asia, and including India as well, where we see that last year especially was a tremendously high growth year for platforms. And many of the platforms are right now gearing up to make more investments into Asian and Southeast Asian filmmakers and acquiring that content as well. So definitely, if you haven't started thinking about who are the platforms out there, how do you access them, and how do you establish the conversation, this is the last moment to do so. Next, please. So, why you would kind of ask yourself, why would platforms want to collaborate with independent filmmakers? And, here are a few kind of venues into that. So obviously, what is the most important thing for platforms? What also, especially up and coming filmmakers don't understand is that the key metric from platforms is not acquiring great content. The key metric for platforms is acquiring more users. And, proceeding from that type of perspective, there are great opportunities for specialized content, documentary content, LGBTQ content, content around certain types of historical or other subject matters, lifestyle content, and so forth. If there is a community or an audience out there. So great things can actually happen more around specialization than a generic art house film. The second point, of course, how platforms will achieve success is obviously winning awards. And the interesting thing, of course, is that, next slide, please, that the cost of the awards, next, please, has been so far quite high. So if for Amazon, a cost of an Emmy used to be about $500 million, and for Netflix, it was about $200 to $300 million. And HBO, which has a history of producing independent film as well. Most recently, Eric Matt is on the job, which I saw in Venice, and it was an excellent film. Congratulations. So, of course, awards are very, very important for platforms, and independent films and strong independent creators are helping the platforms to bring those awards in. And that's why, of course, big platforms, most recently also HBO, Apple, and so forth, are acquiring independent films out of independent film festivals, and this trend will be definitely be growing in the future too. Of course, at the same time, whilst to start engaging with platforms, you also have to understand the kind of inner working mechanisms as platforms work. One thing I said, definitely specialization and understanding which segments of the audiences you are specifically targeting. But for example, it's very interesting to know that Amazon doesn't rate the success of the content it acquires, not by the amount of viewers, what are coming or seeing a particular film or title, but they actually evaluate those by how much a certain type of a series or a piece of content actually will drive new subscribers to their Prime membership. So it's very, very important, again, to keep in mind that those metrics are not only about the numbers of the audiences, but more who they are, and what are their core interests around a certain film or a topic. Next, please. And specifically, the next horizon on the platform front really will be Southeast Asia and what used to be called specialized markets. Right now, the platforms have so-called 80 to 20% ratio. So 80% content is in the 20% languages of the world, aka English and the majority of languages. And of course, in order to maintain their growth, they need to be more localized. And the future definitely will be local stories for global audiences. And that change is going to drive very fast. And most recently, a few weeks ago, also Amazon has taken a very clear stance in accelerating their international film strategy. And it wouldn't be so much surprising that that strategy will also encompass Southeast Asia as well. Next, please. As I said also before, there are new and very interesting audience-centric models approaching. If you are a professional working in animation, then obviously one of the fastest growing areas is taking place or happening around animation and virtual characters. Basically, you as an animation studio will create an IP or a franchise around certain characters. You build the audiences around your characters, and then only as a next step, when you do have your mature audience, you basically start to developing feature or short form content around that. Moonbug is a very, very interesting fund operating outside of London. It's been created by the former Netflix animation team, and they specifically focus on acquiring IP for children, especially in the areas of animation. And many of their acquisitions actually come from Asia. Little Baby Bum, which is, if I'm correct, was a Korean IP. They basically purchased and grew a YouTube channel with hundreds of millions of users. And their business model, of course, very clearly is not utilizing the traditional distribution structure, but in reality, actually making money out of licensing, out of advertising revenues, and so forth. And it's quite an interesting perspective to the animation industry, which used to be very traditional, starting from short form animation and then growing it into features and operating in a very close-knit community. And what we really see is that those types of global, very attractive new IPs are coming from not so usual places in the world: Korea, Russia, Southeast Asia, and so forth. So the great new opportunity, especially for creators who are interested in creating stories for young adults or teenagers or children, comes definitely on the IP front and around virtual characters, animation, and so forth. Next, please. And as I said before, the Generation Z is a very, very interesting, very interesting target. Fortnite, of course, which many have heard about, is not anymore a game. It's just becoming a very clear metaverse or almost a community platform. And the fact that Christopher Nolan decided to premiere the trailer of his latest film Tenet, which, by the way, was also partially shot not so far from my house here in Tallinn, also shows that the studios also have understood of not trying to grab the audience, but going where the audience is. And I think the intersection, especially between game worlds and cinema, both narratively and otherwise, is very, very exciting. But it's definitely clear that the big communities and active communities are there, and filmmakers and distributors and exhibitors need to find ways how to get into those environments. Next, please. And of course, success can happen really from any time and anywhere. I think the biggest paradox is what we're really seeing is that the world, technologically speaking, is the most connected we've ever seen. Strange, little, curious things that can touch people's hearts are emerging anywhere, from anywhere, and success stories really can come also from any places. On the left, you here see there is I just put an example of a very old 1980s city pop record from Japan by Maria Takeuchi. This song that was made in 80s and was quite an oldie. For thanks to those young communities who like to dig up kind of weird vaporware stuff, has more than 46 million views right now on YouTube. Recently, on those small and curious thing, a Cambodian sci-fi film, Karma Link, recently opened the Venice Critics Week. So what I'm basically trying to imply here that whilst digital makes a lot of challenges for us in terms of our classical way of operation and the theatrical exhibition model, digital also, if you manage to identify and build a connection with that audiences and say, for example, the Philippine diaspora around the world, it can be a very, very powerful tool of creating success anytime and anywhere. Next, please. So in a larger picture, of course, what I'm talking about relates to the concept of exponential growth. So exponential growth basically is an argument, and you might have heard about the famous Moore's Law that was originally proposed in the late 1960s, that every 24 months, the power or the computing power of technology will double, and the price of that technology will also decrease by twofold. And originally this term was coined for computer power. But what we see is that the type of exponential growth, like every 24 months, we have a big jump in either technology or society or so forth. And at the same time, the cost will decrease, has been also now been proven to be taking place in industry and the society at large. And if you see this graph, here we have a long line of human history for about 2,000 years, which is almost flat. And then from, I would say, the 1950s and 1960s, when digital technology came aboard, we've almost seen a kind of a rocket rise. And if you basically start thinking about the fact that whilst life around us goes faster and faster, and the film industry basically in its logic is operating exactly the same way as it used to do 100 years ago, and obviously big changes and big crashes are about to come. And as I said before, as a filmmaker, in order to be able to tell stories to changing audiences, you need to have at least a preliminary understanding of those bigger changes. I don't know if you paid one of those examples actually comes from 2 days ago. I don't know if some of you saw the new announcements of Apple, that Apple phones or iPhones actually in the next iteration will be able to start shooting ProRes professional video. Of course, those phones won't be enough, to shoot the feature film. But thinking about independent productions, documentary productions, low-budget productions, and so forth, the fact that you will be able to, have your regular device, but be able to shoot high-quality ProRes video on your phone, I think that's so groundbreaking that obviously we didn't think about those kinds of things maybe 5 or even 10 years ago, that will be able to achieve image quality that used to be done with very expensive cameras. And obviously those big changes will have impacts to our industry too. Next slide, please. So now, since we have about 10 minutes, and I would like to really walk you through some of those bigger things that are happening technology front, what will be having a massive impact on our industry globally and locally as well. First, virtual production. Virtual production, of course, you might already have heard about or you have experienced. It's basically the technology where you can actually shoot real-looking backgrounds created by game engines on virtual sound stages. Originally, this technology pioneered at the Disney's Mandalorian series. But what we definitely see is that imagine the fact that 2 years ago, virtual production technology was conceived for Mandalorian, and now this technology is popping out all over the world. In the last 2 months alone, around the part of the world where I live, in both in Finland and in Latvia, on both sides of Estonia, new virtual production stages are popping up. So this technology that kind of thought to be a rocket science is now almost available in any country in the world. I'm not sure if it's available already in Philippines, but if not, it will come very, very soon. The key thing is that there will be a minimum cost of entry to this technology. It's getting cheaper and cheaper. It's becoming very much local. This technology is always on, which means is that if you have great teams who are creating those virtual productions assets for you, you can shoot anytime, any place, any location, and etc., etc. It will have a tremendous impact creatively, both what we can conceive as a filmmakers, but will also have a lot of impact on the film funds. Imagine what will happen to film commissions if you are able to, for example, create Paris in the Philippines, and you don't have to basically pay the fees to the city of Paris of showing the Eiffel Tower. So a lot of this technology will have a massive democratizing amount. How do we shoot content? How do we shoot films? What can we shoot? We can shoot more optimally and so forth, but definitely it will have an impact on the classical way how funds and skills in the industry are structured. Next, please. The next big change will be about game engines. You might have heard about the Unreal Engine that powers most of the A-list games. But Unreal Engine, of course, is becoming something very bigger. And Epic Games, who's the creator of Unreal Engine, of course, wants to develop this technology to become this sort of next engine of everything. Unreal powers already cinematic and visual effects. It helps to create assets for virtual productions. It powers games and extended reality, and also most recently virtual human experiences. So what we've seen really as quite a big trend is that, especially for DOPs working on films, the new skills what DOPs are learning quite a lot is how to work with game engines, how to work on virtual stages, and how to make game engines work for you. If you're building a future resilience capacity for your production house or for productions, definitely looking at, in principle, how those engines work, or how do you get talent who understand how those engines work, will be very, very pivotal skill. Next, please. Games. It is a very, very exciting time where games, which in terms of its industry and the revenue it makes globally, has already superseded film industry. But we're seeing really an exciting times then, thanks to the fact that the technology is making games more photorealistic. We're getting into an exciting times where cinema and narrative structures of games are merging. And especially last year was quite pivotal in seeing where several A-list games came out that were games, but in reality were playing out as 67-hour plus feature films. One of the games what you might have played is called Death Stranding by the legendary director Hideo Kojima. And what's really unique about this game also is that look who is performing there. Léa Seydoux, Guillermo del Toro, Nicolas Winding Refn, Mads Mikkelsen, and so forth. So we really see the interest of A-level cast also going to play in games. And I think it's a very, very exciting time for especially screenwriters, directors, and DOPs, and anyone involved in the creative process of filmmaking, where we are able to create those really hybrid experiences where you can create a very strong sense of cinematic empathy for your audiences and for your players. And of course, I guess films don't go anywhere, but thanks to the merging of technology, we see that films and games are merging perhaps into one more interactive format in the future. Next, please. And of course, there have been some other examples as well. Ghost of Tsushima, which is another A-list title, the fastest growing original IP, going to be made into a film as well. It's a story about a journey of a samurai in the 13th century Japan in an island of Tsushima during the Mongol invasion. But what is really fascinating about this film is that the film also has a mode which is called the Kurosawa Mode. Basically, it plays out as a Akira Kurosawa Jidaigeki film, to the point where the palette, the texture, the camera movements, and so forth were actually coordinated by the Kurosawa Foundation. And that particular game is also very interesting because it has a very closely knit tie to a locale, to the small island of Tsushima. And obviously, this A-list game has not only sparked interest in the Japanese culture, in the Jidaigeki, but generally also the tourism and exploring the real locations of Tsushima as well, through a very interesting, powerful, and adult empathy generating narrative structure. Next, please. So there are a few other examples as well. Last One of Us, Part 2, which is a very, very interesting survivor horror game. Actually, more a meditation on the perception of violence. This particular game, again, very, very cinematic, has been considered to be by many screenwriters as one of the best games ever written in terms of its narrative content. So again, we see the merging of those two fields and two industries and technologies. Next, please. Also, big platforms are moving into this direction. Netflix has recently, for example, said that the next evolution out of Bandersnatch, which was an interactive series, will be also video games. And in the next year or so, Netflix will be bridging into this area as well, with Poland, for example, being the first country where Netflix tries out video games. So we definitely see that since the core technologies between games and films are becoming quite similar, also from the audiences and the experiences seem to be merging. Next, please. And of course, the big revolutions will come from synthetic media and AI. The people you see here on those photos are not real. They are basically generated by artificial intelligence. And what we definitely see in the next 2 to 5 year horizon, that performances in film and media will be increasingly generated by either fully or artificially created performers or semi-artificially created performers. And Samsung here on the left is already premiering a form of their synthetic humans. The meta-human platform of Unreal is here on the right, and Digital Domain and some of those others. Big companies are experimenting with virtual humans as well. Next, please. So this synthetic media landscape actually is very, very vibrant. And especially for post-production and for creativity, the opportunities are absolutely amazing. We see things around virtual humans, artificial dubbing, language translations, optimization of post-production, and so forth. So all of those things that used to be very expensive and very time-consuming, technology can do very fast and in quite miraculous ways. And I have a few clips that I would like to play you as next. So let's see those two clips.
Script.
Like it or not, there's gonna come a day when you think,
I should record this presentation.
We should do a podcast.
A pod what?
I should start a YouTube channel.
I should
record my screen. Hey guys. Hey everyone.
And
we're pushing.
I've never actually.
Oh my god. We record a lot of stuff.
yep, you do. But before you share it,
Sent.
I don't like this.
You're gonna want to edit it first.
Uh-oh.
But editing is
Hard, I know. Where do you even start, right? Well, I'll show you where to start. Meet Descript. It's a powerful new tool that makes editing easy. So easy that you'll want to edit videos.
nice. How does it
Work? Well, first you need some video or audio. If you've already got some, just drag it right into Descript. Wait for it.
Hey guys, welcome to my first YouTube video. Hopefully my little guys don't fall.
Whoa.
What?
Nah.
Yeah, it takes your audio and turns it into text. So when this happens,
Alright guys, I'm going in. Sweetie. What? Dinner. I'm doing a thing, Mom!
you can cut it out like this.
Okay.
How about that?
But get this, Descript can turn your text back into audio.
I'm pretty sure this is a first edition super rare creature kawaii. I was wrong. It's a 7th edition, more common than water creature kawaii.
It's called overdub. Just type what you meant to say right into Descript.
I'm pretty sure this is a 7th edition creature kawaii.
And for those who need it, Descript has a screen recorder built right in.
Hey everyone. We're pushing a big update today to our content management system.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop you right there. This is so boring.
I know.
Check it out.
Hey everyone. We're pushing
With a click, you can remove every kind of, like, and whatever the hell that is.
Hey everyone. We're pushing a big update today to our CMS.
Woo! That's so cool.
And with a few clicks, you can publish your project right to the web and easily share with anyone.
Damn, Jenny. Underestimated.
Okay, next clip, please.
And Descript is no slouch either, with support for things like non-destructive multi-track precision editing.
No.
So here's another example.
So we'd like to show you how this app works and some of the features that can help you get exactly what you need. We've preloaded a project with a conversation between two characters. This is the scene view. It has a script editor on the top and a timeline at the bottom. In the script editor, you can easily add lines like, let's just wait. And that speech will render instantly through the semantic voice model. So let's play it back.
Let's just wait.
Okay, now let's play the full scene.
Okay, we're in a good spot. Let's just wait.
The enemy fleet is attacking. What are your orders?
Get the shields and weapons ready for combat.
Yes, Captain. Shields powered and weapons armed.
So making changes on the timeline is simple. You can move clips. You can change the volume of each individual item. You can add in fades. So here's a fade in, fade out. Now, the scene sounded quite good, but it didn't have the emotion that you would expect in a scene like this. By going to Style, we can individually select the emotions for each line. So I will choose Fear for the major, maybe Anger for the captain who's giving orders, back to Fear for the major. We might want to make them speak faster to make it sound a little bit more urgent. So let's up the pacing of each line.
The enemy fleet is attacking. What are your orders?
Get the shields and weapons ready for combat.
Yes, Captain. Shields powered and weapons
So
armed.
thank you. Let's
If
go
a
forward.
word is uncommon
So,
or
as you can
it's a
see-
name that's pronounced unusually,
Next slide, please. All right, so basically what you see is that, those things that used to be a kind of a part of the rocket science, those things are available for independent creators and so forth. Those two particular tools, by the way, no professional affiliation here. I just wanted to show you examples. Are right now working with a basic creator level video, but there are companies such as Respeecher and others who are able to basically generate voices, fix your video, produce virtual characters, and so forth for independent productions. So you're about to see that this explosion in technology, this kind of rocket growth, is basically going to have huge ways how we localize content, how do we do post-production, how do we create films more efficiently, and so forth. And it's a really amazing, it's about becoming a very amazing time where you have a lot of tools that basically help you to make better films faster and cheaper. And I'm just going to go walk you, as we are running out of time, some of those tools, what I've been using personally and what I think are already surfing the wave. So next, please. So really those tools are about, if our industry used to be, the decisions were used to be mostly based on that gut feeling. I guess the audience is this. I don't know, maybe, it should be like this and that. And most of those strategic production and distribution decisions have been made by that, especially in the independent community. Then those times are changing. Next slide, please. There are already companies such as Usher.U, which are amassing amazing amounts of data about the performance of your film in real time. So Usher.U, it's an Irish company founded by former executives from Google. What they basically do is that they scan the whole world, the VOD platforms, the theatrical platforms, understanding which films for any country, language, and so forth are playing all over the world. The screenshot, what you see here, is that I just took out as I am using the platform, I just yesterday took out the statistics for my film, and I can see based on that at this moment on VOD, the film is available on Shutter in Canada, United States, in Finland, in Spain, in Belgium, Poland, and so forth. And, if communication with a sales agent quite often is quite, can be quite slow and they have other priorities and so forth, the fact that you have access to that type of granular data at any moment helps you to do better decisions. You might want to work with a local distributor to do a marketing campaign for your film. You might actually want to do a social media communication saying like, hey, our film is playing in Poland, or, it's available in Shutter, or, it's in Malaysia, go check it out if you're in Malaysia. It just helps you to make the production and distribution work more efficiently. Next slide, please. There are also companies such as Synalytic, and next slide, please. Largo from Switzerland, which are using artificial intelligence to basically simulate the box office success of your film. Largo AI, they come from Switzerland. By the way, right now they have a program where they work with international producers on piloting artificial intelligence solutions for their productions. Recently did a pilot with ACE Producers. It's one of those premium producer training networks in Europe, with 30 ACE producers, demonstrating clearly how artificial intelligence can actually already predict scenarios, at least 3 or 4 performance scenarios, how your film will do based on your script, the cast which you are casting, and so forth. And actually this year at Cannes, we also ran a workshop with Largo AI and Levallois, which is an Oscar-winning production company from France. And we actually found out that using AI tools can just give so much more certainty on the performance of your film, and will help you to identify right cast choices for your productions. By the way, similar tools are already used by the big platforms as well. And when we were preparing for the session in Cannes, I actually used the same tool to analyze the last production that I did, and believe it or not, the AI basically got it right with a plus minus 10% scenario. Next, please. There are also companies such as FilmChain, which help you to manage revenues. FilmChain is a London-based company that basically does instantaneous payments between all the parties in a film recoupment contract. So imagine if you're producing a film, of course you have your investors, you have your public financing, but you might also want to give equity financing opportunities for your cast, crew, and so forth. What FilmChain basically does is that they create the digital contract, and when money comes in from a distribution deal to your account, FilmChain automatically, transparently distributes that money in an instant, a second, to everybody in your waterfall. It's totally amazing because not only you are saving money from your bank fees and so forth, but it means that everybody basically gets paid right, very fast at the right time and so forth. They've already working with several big European film funds. Recently, they did the Oscar-winning Romanian documentary. Excuse me, the name. Not Congress. It kind of eludes me, but it comes. comes back to me in a second. And particularly myself, we are working also with them on our new documentary because we want to manage our production financing much more faster and transparently for our stakeholders. Next, please. And of course, there are, companies that help you to do your workflows better. Promomi, this is a company from UK. What they basically do is imagine a kind of a Dropbox that automatically does transcriptions of your footage and basically analyzes and creates a map who is in your footage, where, how, and then etc. So when you're producing, for example, a documentary film, imagine how much time you're spending in transcribing your footage for your editor. When you upload your clips to Promomi, it can analyze your clips. It generates automatically transcriptions, which you can export to your editing program. It basically, helps you to search the footage by location, time, who is in the footage, and etc. And the whole process of editing, especially large volumes of material on feature films or documentaries, becomes just so much more easier. And specifically for the new documentary we're producing, we are using the same platform to give the automatic transcripts to our editorial department as well as our directors, instead of putting sending those out to transcribers and so forth. And it helps us to maintain a really great workflow. Next slide, please. So the next slide. So where this is leading, and I would like to conclude on this slide because our time is running out for today, and hopefully we'll be able to converse on some of the bigger impacts of those changes to markets as well. Next slide, please. It is a time for indie filmmaker 2.0. So if the old world was basically about slow, step-by-step, very kind of narrative script development perspective for the producers, it was inherently local. It was very much dependent on the public financing and scattered funding. It had very much of fixed story formats and conventions. Theatrical was definitely first and digital later. Nobody kind of thought about the audience, and the audience came last if it was not clearly a commercial film, and technology was very much evil or disregarded, and there was no validation. Then the new world, or the success in the new world, will be, I would say, more faster or agile development, focus on the very strong concept and an IP. It is about accessing global audiences with local stories. It will be about private money, VC money, or boosting it up with non-traditional funding. There needs to be a right format for the right story. It's definitely digital first. Audience is a core priority, because if nobody sees your film, there will be no revenue or no benefit falling back. There will be a lot of validation, and definitely the new world will be about collaborating and learning with everyone throughout the value chain. What will mean this for the film markets? And could I have, I think, the last slide between my contact slide, the final slide, because we need to skip a few. What this will mean for the film markets? In generally speaking, it means that since the traditional value chain in the film markets is closing, that we see the traditional producer to sales agent to distributor exhibitor model is being very much challenged. The film markets are also changing quite a lot. And especially what we see in Cannes, and I can testify clearly that the future of the film markets, they will be hybrid. Which means is that, because of the COVID restrictions, a lot of people cannot attend, and also because less money is available for the structural aspects of the film markets. Online form of doing business in the film markets. Yes, please. Can we go the last slide? Can we go a few slides back? One more back, please. Yes. So since market will be hybrid, and both the deal makers and providers in that space will be predominantly online, then it's very, very important for you to understand how will you position your film and how you're going to that market. Of course, we have the big markets such as Cannes, Berlin, and AFM, and to some degree Toronto. But there are also a lot of specialized markets, and what we definitely see is that there is an industry program or a viable industry program attached to almost all international festivals. So the core point for you, if you want to go out internationally, is that you need to map your goals and understanding what are the real needs for your project. Do you need a script consultant? Are you looking for a specific co-producer? Are you looking for a post-production aid? Are you looking for money? And so forth. So you have to kind of identify what are those most imminent and important needs, what your project needs, and pick your market accordingly. Quite often, especially the emerging filmmakers think that going to bigger markets is good for the reputation of a project. Yes, of course, if you're invited, but generally speaking, specialization around smaller markets is good. So pick the right market that gives you maximum value for you or your project. And more famous or more bigger is definitely not better. You also have to understand the timing in the market to kind of understand, especially in online, who can you access and what time and what is the flow of the market. So, for example, on bigger markets, the first weeks definitely for sales agents will be busy because they're selling. And the second week of the market is much more slower, where you can actually go and pitch your film if you're looking for a sales agent. And of course, last but not least, you have to be ready for the digital shift. It's already here. And that's why you also need to build your digital presence. You have to have your digital assets. You have to be ready for the digital deal making. You have your LinkedIn presence and so forth, because much of our business in the future will be around digital environments. So as we are running out of time, thank you so much for listening. This was a kind of a crash course into some of those bigger shifts, what we see in the landscape that will and are already influencing independent filmmakers. And if you have any questions, then I'm very happy to answer them in the time given to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Sten. At this point, we're opening our floor for the audience's questions. We have pretty interesting ones here. And to start off, here is a question from Rona Laliana. She asks, what's your take on current battles right now between theatrical release and streaming platforms? Do you think independent productions can offer better alternatives to actors or crew on their equity or fees after distribution on streaming?
Sorry, can you repeat the question as well? I had a little bit hard time of hearing you. So it was about platforms and talent, yes?
Yes, she asked, what's your current take on the battles right now between theatrical release and streaming platforms? Can independent productions offer better alternatives to actors or crew on their equity fees after distribution on streaming?
This is a very, very interesting question. Okay, so this is my kind of my own personal take. So first of all, I just want to kind of make one thing very straight, is about kind of before having that type of a conversation. As a producer, you basically need to have an understanding what that particular digital platform will give you and will not give you. And I can make a kind of an example of this. So when we were producing our last film, we actually received an offer from one of those digital platforms. And to your point, we also had one of our actors on a kind of a friendly semi-equity contract on that particular production. And since we had rudimentary understanding on how the platforms work, we also understood what was the offer of the platform. By the way, the offer of the platform was pretty much in par of what we had achieved from Theatrical and sales, from our sales network. And we decided not to go with the platform because we had one of quite well-known sales companies as a kind of a supporter of our project from very early on. So we kind of went on the theatrical route. But economically speaking, the outcome of the film actually was pretty much the same. So, it wasn't really the aspect on there. So I think the conversation, firstly, I think there's two things in there. The first thing is, of course, like how do you actually get talent, talent involved? And of course, in generally speaking, for platforms, talent is really the key. And especially if you look what has happened in Japan, obviously the platforms, first made deals with talent agencies, and then the production kind of circle came later. So I think you have to have very fair conversations with your talent. What is more important for your talent? Is it important for your talent the money what they get and what type of equity structure you put in there, or is it important for your core talent to have the film shown in theatrical? Because those are quite different things. My kind of prediction is that at this very volatile economic environment, if you don't have a very good distribution deal in place and you don't have very, very strong projections and risk alleviation mechanisms, then basically basing your talent's equity financing on a theatrical window is very, very risky. Because the theatrical window, even on the bigger markets such as Germany, last year, for example, I saw really, really big cinema chains, going into total chaos. So basically putting that particular risk into a kind of a market volatility for your talent recoupment, very difficult. Now, the conversation then, if you don't based on your strategy on that particular risk, I think then you also have to start negotiating with the platform. Some of the and your distribution methodology. Of course, we tend to think about the platforms only as the big ones, but of course there are many OTT platforms or local platforms that are seeing especially quite a big growth in Europe, which are open about their statistics, and those equity models are available. So, and actually, to be true, you could recoup your film from smaller platforms and not getting into the big ones. And in that model, if the platform basically is playing with you to release the data, then you can build an equity model. But in general speaking, I would either, to kind of summarize my long answer, figure out what your talent really wants. Is it about money, or is it for them to reach the communities in the theatrical? And then figure those things out separately, independently of whether your film is going to be on a platform or in a theatrical window.
Thanks for that, Sten. Another interesting question we have here from Tyra Alvarade. She asks, do you think the problem with not being able to rely on theatrical releases for the film's main recoup of finances is teetering dangerously close to being solely a third world country problem, especially with our situation right now, with more and more cinemas opening up in other countries, considering that their vaccination rollout is much faster than others without immediate access to said vaccines? What do you think about that?
So if I understand the question correctly, that you think that the inability of the theatrical recoupment will be amplified, for example, in the Philippines because of the relegation of the vaccination rollouts and so forth. So this is a very, very interesting question, and we have there is quite contradictory data around this. And to be fair enough, I think in the long horizon, we are getting into a situation where I think the kind of the established territories and non-established territories are exactly in the same situation. Last week I had a conversation with a very well-known distributor from Italy. And although Italy, of course, suffered quite a lot, or tremendously, last year, and the theaters are opening now, and vaccination rates are getting very, very high, people have very hard time of getting back into cinemas in general. And even if protective measures are there, and I think what the year basically did to us was the fact that since a lot of content is available online, either in legal or also in pirated form, and the cost of basically high quality televisions and so forth are getting cheaper and cheaper. Then despite the fact that people are whether they live in Philippines or Estonia or Germany or France and etc. It actually takes quite a lot of stretch to go to cinemas. Of course, there are technological-based questions indeed, where countries which don't have very good broadband connections and so forth are lagging a little bit, on the digital wave. But those things inherently will be changing it too in the near future. So I think in general, yes, perhaps temporarily, smaller countries will be in a disadvantaged situation where, thanks to vaccinations, there might be, there are inequalities. But in the long run, the larger question, actually, as I said before in the beginning, is the fact that since digital is just occupying our mindset so much, consciously or subconsciously, the larger question is like, how do we get people back into theaters at all? And that basically has to then deal with either building a very, very strong connection with the audiences, or making the theatrical a very, very special experience. And in a risk environment for foreseeable future, audiences have hard times of going to cinemas just psychologically. If it's not a very big candy, say Dune or Bond or etc., etc. But if you manage to create special experiences around those exhibition screenings, as a producer, bringing in your cast or making those other experiences otherwise special, I think you have a chance of basically competing or being at the same level with more established countries.
All right, thank you for that. Now we are down to our last 3 questions. Here is one from a delegate from the Philippines. He asks, you mentioned about the death of theatrical as a form of exhibition. But in the Philippines, many producers still prefer premiering their films in cinemas with the belief that it's still the best option if they want their films to earn. This is despite the pandemic, where cinemas are still closed after a year in the country. What would be your advice in how to shift that perspective?
Look, I think we should not confuse. I think there's a few things that we should not confuse, and what I want to be 100% clear that I don't see absolutely the death of cinema as a storytelling or an art form, because we as humans, we want to engage with powerful stories, and cinema is one of the most excellent ways that brings together all other arts to make and bring those very powerful and touching stories to us. And by the way, I just had a debate on this in Venice with a Philippine delegation on the same subjects as well. But what I'm basically implying here is one of the things that the cinema industry for 100 years primarily has operated on the logic that we produce the content and then the audience should come to theaters to watch it. In other words, we produce something and then we kind of presume, or we tell the audience to come to a place that we have designated to watch that content. And we rarely have asked the audiences where they want to watch this content. Is it accessible to them, in terms of security? Is it accessible for them, on the way of, how much the tickets cost? Is it the right format to exhibit and so forth? I am totally 100% for premiering films and having specialized screenings with an audiences in theatrical, because the experience is very, very important. And what we saw this year in Cannes and also last week in Venice, the feeling and the emotion of seeing a film collectively in a theater, of course, is something extraordinary. At the same time, I think we also have to be realistically separating those premium special experiences such as premieres, special screenings and so forth, which should be in a theater, from the bulk of a distribution, which is making that film accessible for a variety of, audiences. And I think this is really what COVID has shown us, especially with the big rush of those big, powerful film theater groups in the rest of the world. In Germany, the AMC in the United States, the fact that the Pacific Theater was closed in LA, we basically kind of see that the audiences are, sorry to say, taking control over their lives, and they are defining where they want to see that content. So in a way, I guess, the future in there, at some point, I think the breaking point will come where I would be very much happy if audiences continue to enjoy films in the theaters in Philippines. But generally, what we are seeing is that the producers are differentiating and are going to differentiate more and more about their kind of premium strategies of premiering the films in theaters, and then actually achieving the highest accessibility for audiences at any platforms. Basically, that means is that if you have a release, make sure that in your country the film is available on a maximum amount of platforms available, to access the largest audiences. That means OTTs. I think telecoms will have a lot of say because they are usually the first access point, and then obviously trying to negotiate deals or opportunities with those bigger platforms as well. One of the things what I also want to say as the last remark is we have this very bad habit as a film industry to always look in the past. And what I mean by that is that we always say that sometimes there was a good old times where there was enough money in the industry and so forth and so forth. But in reality, I think we should really think about the future, basically in a way that we are not talking about the deceased audiences, but we're talking about the present audiences or the future audiences. And in reality, any decision that you and me would take after this conversation will, in the short term, will have influences in a kind of a 3 to 5 year horizon. So that basically means that those kids who are right now 12 or 13, that the decisions we take today to improve our distribution structure or so forth, those decisions will primarily influence them. So why we should very, very clearly, in making our future distribution strategies and projections on the structuring of the industry, look into that horizon. Where do those people hang out? Where do the young adults hang out? What are their preferences for access? What are their natural ways of going? Are they hanging around in film theaters? Maybe, but maybe in some other places. So in that respect, they will define very much of where shall we go. I think we have to emphasize the excellent storytelling and the powerful stories that we bring into the screen, but we should also be able to respect the audiences of going there and making our film scene where they want to engage with the films and have the best access to our films. One of the things what this has made me, for example, to consider that since we are making a documentary right now about young athletes, of many of them young athletes in extreme ski sports, and many of them are online and YouTube and TikTok celebrities, then one of those conversations that we've been having very thoroughly with our production team is that perhaps our main release platform should be YouTube. Just because of the fact that we know that the huge community is there. Of course, we want to have theatrical. We want to put the film and premiere it in a theater for our lead heroes and heroines of that movie. But if our majority of our audiences is on those online platforms, then I think we have much more harder time of trying to convince them to come to theaters than rather actually putting the film into the place where they are and then trying to negotiate a good distribution structure around that.
Thank you for that very detailed answer, Sten. I hope our audience took note of that. All right, on to our next question. We have here from Rona Laliana. She asks, what are the factors behind the success of the film you did in Laos that you believe can be replicated for other ASEAN films? Did you have any specific tools or technology or streaming strategies behind that film?
So, of course, thank you for the question. So, primarily, I have to say that the success of the film was thanks to our amazing director, Maddie Doe, and her persistence and her courage and her stubbornness to do everything in order to make the film succeed. But I think this film came out in 2016, but there were a few things which I think in hindsight kind of contributed to the success. So, so this film was a co-production of Laos, Estonia, and France. And particularly on a story level, there are sometimes quite big challenges of like, how would you make a co-production how would you make a co-production work so it makes kind of sense of all the cultural elements and so forth, especially in Europe. since cultural elements are very important for co-productions. But so from a story level, it was very interesting. What Maddie's film was talking about was really the way how Laos is changing at this moment, and where they have this clash of the original Lao culture and as well as this kind of a new, rather capitalistic and exploitative Western culture that comes into Laos. And what we kind of found very attractive, and what I think also touched the audiences quite a lot, was that although the film was about, Laos situation, it very well resonated with my own history in Eastern Europe in the 90s, where when we had, became free from Soviet Union, and there was exactly those same types of exploitative stories. So there was definitely that type of a core resonance around the subject. The second aspect, of course, was that we had, and Maddie had actually quite a good strategy in positioning the film. So she had made a short film called Chantilly, which premiered at Fantastic Fest, and thanks to that, actually, there was quite a lot of buzz around this new small Lao film and genre films made in Laos. And Twitch Film, now called Screen Anarchy, actually started following the production. And when there were updates about the film, then those updates were actually published around Twitch Film. So there was already a kind of a community building around the title, and the interest was building around the title. And one of the key points what I encourage especially young filmmakers to do is that start talking to journalists, start talking to bloggers, and start talking to them already, and get to know them, not when you have completed the production, but get to know them while you are planning a production, because you should use those contacts to basically announce to the international press whether you received financing or whether you have entered the project market and so forth, because you will go onto the radar of a film festival or another project market and so forth. So don't leave those things at the very end, but start thinking about them very deliberately. Who could be those festivals I want to premiere this? Which are those blogs that could put out the information about this production? Can we start basically cultivating the audience even before we start shooting? So that was a very, very good blessing for our production. And thanks to that publicity, and since Todd Brown, who's a partner at XYZ Films, a very well-known genre outfit, he was also the chief editor, and he actually became an executive producer on our film. The next thing, of course, was that since we needed financing, we organized also a crowdfunding campaign that actually worked as a marketing vehicle for the film. So again, there was some community buzz and information going about the title as well as on the festival circuit too. And of course, what was very, very critical for us was really at the time, still in 2016, of course, a lot of Southeast Asian films, since they were operated on a very low budget, then the production quality, of course, sometimes wasn't I don't want to say high enough, but at least the production quality and the production resourcing sometimes played to a disadvantage of Southeast Asian films. And I can also say this from the Black Nights Film Festival perspective, where we used to, receive quite a lot of submissions. And especially from a festival programmer's perspective, if you look at films, then you have to also, besides looking at the creative elements of the film, you also have to see how the film fits into the slate or the overall structure of a competition or program, and how it fits to an audience paradigm. And clearly, for example, in Eastern Europe, films which are lower production quality or lower production resource somehow are being perceived as lower quality by the audiences, which necessarily not might be the truth. But then again, festivals and distributors and so forth have a very hard time of accepting them to their lineups or distribution lineups. So based out of that, one of the core decisions what we actually made was saying, like, okay, we might go money-wise into a very difficult position, but we have to make the film with the highest production quality possible. So what that basically meant was, instead of shooting the film on a Blackmagic, we actually went to shoot the film on Alexa, and that was in 2016, which ensured the film that we are at least going into same technical terms and, the maximum production quality terms as any other film. And I think the combination of the fact exactly that we had cultivated the press before, this was a unique story that was very Southeast Asian, but on its very grassroots kind of touched people all over the world. There was a genre element in there, and we also packaged and produced it in a highest maximum quality possible. I think all of those factors contributed to the success of the title. And one more thing I want to say. When you are thinking about your festival strategy, don't always think about the festivals as your endpoints, but think about them as the festival programmers, as your advisors. And, our story basically was that we submitted the film also to Cannes, and we didn't get in. However, generously, we actually received quite a good feedback from the programming team for example, that they suggested that we should make some types of cuts to the film and so forth. And initially we were like, yeah, I don't know, and are those really necessary? But we decided to follow their feedback because they are professionals who see hundreds and hundreds of films and have a lot of expertise and can basically work as your kind of reflection point. So we made edits to the film, and I have to say that this international version, in hindsight, was much better, and the feedback we received, although we didn't get in, but the feedback we received was essential. So in that way, if your film gets rejected, but you have a good relationship with the programmer and you get that feedback to your cut to improve the film, it's also very, very good outcome, I would say. So try to build those relationships too.
All right, thank you for that. Now to our last question. What is your advice to filmmakers starting out, especially in third world countries that are already behind in development technologies?
Sorry, can you say, what is your advice for filmmakers in the third world countries about new technologies?
That are already behind in development technologies, yes.
I don't actually think that you are behind. Film industry in general is very, very conservative, and I think we are all. I think the next big challenge in the next 2 to 3 years will be anyway in the more established film industry and in more established independent film industry and say the Philippines is also actually is like, how does the old industry pivot into this new type of reality? Because it has been kind of going on within those cogwheels for a year, and if you start thinking about that, you are not necessarily in a worse position than, let's say, an independent producer in country X in Europe. Both have kind of advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of those old producers and old structures is the fact that they have so established business processes that for them to understand the root cause of those business processes and make necessary changes, it's very, very hard. And that can act a very big the barrier for success. For you, you might not have those resources, but the thing is that, as I said before, technology and access to those technologies is getting significantly cheaper and cheaper. I mean, the fact, I just come back to this iPhone point, right? The fact that a 1,000 euro iPhone can shoot ProRes, with a very decent quality, I think I'm very much looking for, how this will go on a field practice. But, you have your phone, everyday device, and your professional camera for 1,000 euro. Of course, it's quite a lot of money, but, considering rentals and, costs in the long term and, the iteration of that, it's going to be much, much more cheaper. Those examples of the technologies I showed today, for example, Usher You, Promo Me for managing your assets, Film Chain, we're talking about marginal costs, and the interesting thing about those new solutions there would be that people actually don't understand how cheap or how accessible those technologies really are. And I think the biggest groundbreaking thing here has been that, for example, in terms of post-production or optimization or etc., we're doing giant leaps in possibilities and equally giant leaps in costs. For example, in Poland, there is a company called Comixify, that basically uses artificial intelligence to do rotoscoping, basically green screens automatically. things that used to be very, very expensive and manual, their platform can actually do it in real time and pretty cheap. So I guess your opportunity here is to understand what goes on in the world and make sense how you can use those tools and opportunities, to amplify and make your stories more competitive and more better. And at the end of the day, I firmly believe that the future will be about amazing storytelling, which is accessible on platforms or opportunities where audiences are. And in this way, amazing stories have come and will come from Philippines, and amazing stories will come from Europe. So your primary concern is to be an amazing storyteller and then understand technology enough to make those stories reach those audiences which are the most dearest to you.
Thank you very much for your wonderful insights, Sten. We really appreciate it. Now, would you like to share some last words for our audience? And maybe you can share where our audience can reach and contact you?
Sure. So if the technical team wants to put my last slide. So thank you so much. I would very much love to be in the Philippines. The last time I was there was about 6 years ago. But nevertheless, thank you, FDCP. Thank Liza and G and the whole team for helping to set up this wonderful conversation. I sincerely hope that you found something interesting for you, that touched you and helped a little bit make sense of this very changing world. I also encourage you, if you want to have more information about this, in a few weeks, most of the sessions, what we did this year at Cannes, will be available on YouTube. So there are amazing sessions on digital distribution, decision-making, data, some new film funds, which I didn't have a chance to talk about, that are taking place right now. So check those out. And if you want to contact me for further details or so forth, then my email address is Sten, STEN, @office Saluveer. So it's office, as in English, officesaluveer.com. And I'm also basically anything and everything on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So thank you so much. Thank you for staying for this wonderful evening, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you so much, Sten, for this interesting session. It is indeed a great session with very informative notes that our audience should remember. These learnings that you have shared with us will be useful, especially in this time of recovery from the pandemic. We would also like to thank our participants for joining us here today. Please let us know your thoughts about our session by answering our IFIC survey form that is linked in our chat box. Thank you, keep safe everyone, and we hope to see you in our next sessions. Again, this is the International Film Industry Conference Online 2021.
Thank you very much to our speaker for a very insightful talk, and to our dear audience for tuning in. Keep safe, and we hope to see you in our next sessions. For more details on IFIC, please check our official social media accounts. Facebook page, www.facebook.com/IFICPHofficial. Twitter, @IFICPHofficial. And Instagram, IFICPHofficial. Check out the full lineup of public sessions and masterclasses for this year's Film Industry Conference. Visit our website at fdcp.ph/IFIC.